I don't care what the scoreboard says at the end of the game. In my book, we're going to be winners.
From the small-town dream team in Hoosiers.
Ready, set, hot.
After high school, I'm going to play football at Notre Dame.
To the unforgettable underdog story behind Rudy. For Indiana screenwriter and producer Angelo Pizzo, it's never about the wins and losses. It's all about the characters. And when he's not scoring big time with Indiana-based sports films, Pizzo is all in on IU basketball.
Smart takes the shot, and the Hoosiers with 3 seconds. Go ahead.
And we mean all in. The connection between IU's 1987 national championship, Hollywood's biggest night, and talented storyteller Angelo Pizzo, who has yet another Indiana-based sports film up his sleeve. He's my guest this week on the Business and Beyond podcast. Hello and welcome to the Business and Beyond podcast, presented by PNC. I'm Gary Dick. Angelo Pizzo was born in Chicago. His dad, a doctor whose first job out of medical school was in Bloomington. That's where Pizzo grew up. And Indiana University, it was his playground. He rebounded during practices for IU legends like Jimmy Rale and Walt Bellamy back in the day. He's been a season ticket holder for years, so passionate about IU basketball that he skipped the 1987 Academy Awards to watch the Hoosiers win the NCAA title. Angelo has also been a big force behind Indiana's new media and film tax credit, designed to attract more media production in Indiana. He's also working on several new projects, including a film about the first Indianapolis 500. And I'm very pleased to be joined by screenwriter, producer Angelo Pizzo from Bloomington. Angelo, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Hey, what have you been up to these days? You know, obviously a lot going on. The pandemic, which obviously or hopefully we're on the backside or the downside of that, has affected all industries. But I think you kept pretty busy over the last couple of years. What have you been up to?
Well, the thing about being a writer, that part of my repertoire, so to speak, it didn't matter. There was a lot of development going on during the pandemic. So I wrote 3 or 4 different scripts, and I could keep busy in that regard. One of the scripts that I wrote did get financed, and we are trying to cast it now. In fact, after I talk to you, I'm going to do 2 Zoom auditions with 2 actresses this afternoon. And once we cast that, we will either go into production this fall or we will go into production in the spring. So we're kind of in a very tight window whether we can make it weather-wise, because we plan to shoot this in either Indiana or Kentucky. And in Indiana, depending on the tax credit, and they're working on that now. My producers, that is.
Hey, I want to ask you about the tax credit because you've been a really passionate supporter of that for some time now. But can you tell us anything about the project and the film and what it's about?
Sure. Yeah, it's a change of pace for me insofar that it's not about sports. In fact, it's a coming of age romance set against the Civil War. And the coming of age character, the protagonist that I focus on, it's a true story, is a female. So I haven't written female leads in the past either, but it's a terrific story. It was presented to me, and it really excited me, and I'm all pumped up and ready to go. It'll be about an $8.5 million movie.
Wow, that's so a woman soldier.
Well, she inadvertently becomes one. She doesn't set out at the beginning. It's quite a journey this young woman goes through. I'll just give you the setup. In fact, boy and girl fall in love. The boy signs up to go fight for the Union. This originally takes place in Northern Illinois. And the letters go back and forth until the letters stop coming from the battlefront. And she gets panicked. And after not hearing from him for a couple of months, cuts her hair off, dresses as a boy, and enlists in his regiment, and is sent down. And she starts to look for him, and that's the beginning of the story.
Wow.
So
that is intriguing. Very, very good. You mentioned sports, and obviously Hoosiers and Rudy, such iconic sports films. There's another film, right, that I know you've been working on. Give us the update on the film, the project you do on the first Indianapolis 500. And I know it's really a lot about Carl Fisher, that amazing automotive entrepreneur.
It is about Carl Fisher because he was the genius behind it. He was such a larger-than-life character. And I was drawn to the story, not just because it was an origin story, but because of his larger-than-life personality. And Carl Fisher also invented Miami Beach and Montauk as well, and created the Lincoln Highway. He was a genius, but a flawed man, like a lot of geniuses are. And that makes for an interesting character. I wrote the script about 12 years ago, and we tried to get it going at that time, but the costs were prohibitive. Because recreating the Brickyard back then, recreating those old cars, et cetera, was just too expensive. Now, with the lowering of cost of CGI, computer graphics, it has become much more feasible. We can do so much of what the original track looked like in the computer. So, and the producer director of this film, Justin Eskew, found somebody in, I believe it's Nashville, who is a fabricator and who can recreate, actually not through a computer, but in actuality, the original cars. So now it has become much more practical in a lot of different ways. So there's renewed energy and interest, and the project has a lot of viability. Now what it needs is just a few more dollars in investment, and we can get this thing made.
Yeah, I think I heard you or read some quotes from you talking about creating sports films like the Hoosiers or Rudy, the first Indy 500, that needs to be about more than kind of the scores, the defeats or the victories on the field, but about people, the human element. That a correct assessment?
That is, and this is something that I learned when I looked at as many sports films as I could before I wrote Hoosiers. That the movies that matter, the movies that you care about emotionally, are those where you connect to the characters. It's never about the sports. It's never about who wins and loses. And if you look back at Hoosiers, for example, it was important for me, for the audience, to care for these people. Not so much that the outcome is that critical. It's a nice kind of icing on the cake, but it's not what the movie is about. And I will give you an example of what I consider a success with Rudy, for example. We were at the premiere of Rudy in Los Angeles. We had multiple premieres, including one in South Bend. And a woman came up to me who was the wife of somebody who had worked at TriStar, the studio that made our film. And she said, my husband dragged me to this movie. I had no interest in watching a movie about football. I don't like football. I don't like sports. And I lived in Chicago, and I couldn't stand anybody who went to Notre Dame. So there were like 3 strikes against you, and there's no way. And he said, you have to see this movie. And he said, I cried for 3 or 4 minutes after the film was in. And I said, it got me deep, and it made me think about how I had put my own dreams of my own career on the shelf. And maybe I was kind of reassessing what I had done and maybe what I can do in the future. And it gave me some inspiration and some hope. And I remember putting my arms around her and said, I made this movie for you. In fact, that was the idea, that you don't make it for the sports person. You make it for the person who doesn't like sports. It should affect them in the same way that a sports aficionado should react to the film.
Did that emotional connection that was created by Rudy, by Hoosiers, not only with folks in Indiana, but literally around the globe, did Did that surprise you at all as to the impact that those movies over time have had?
It shocked me. Honestly, I think when you're making a movie, especially going back to Hoosiers, which was my first film and my first screenplay, you're working in a kind of creative bubble, and you really don't have any sense of objectivity. You can't stand outside of it and think, oh, people will like this or like that. There's just no way of knowing. There's a lot of kind of a wing in the prayer when you're making any movie, and you just never know until you get it in front of an audience that has no vested interest. And I mean, we screened Hoosiers for our friends, family, and studio people, and they all seemed to like it, but that really didn't matter until we got that in front of a audience in Irvine, California, who knew nothing about the movie. And that response gave us our first clue that maybe we had something. But the biggest surprise, honestly, is not just that that audiences responded well at that time, but that the fact that those two films have sustained in the way they have over the years. Yeah. Actually, that's been kind of a shocker. I can't tell you that anybody can ever anticipate something like that.
Yeah. Film production, media production in Indiana, you touched on it earlier. Certainly Hoosiers was filmed back in the mid-'80s in multiple communities in Indiana. Rudy, I think, was in South Bend and Whiting in different locations. The Indiana legislature has okayed a film and media production credit of, I think, up to 30%. You were a staunch supporter and an advocate for that. Now that it's happened, your reaction, what in your view does this or can this mean for Indiana?
Well, again, going back to the time in which we made those films, there were only, I think, 3 or 4 states that gave tax credits. Mm-hmm. Louisiana was the first. I think New Mexico followed. And we really have no choice. And that's where we had to shoot those movies here. But honestly, and this is the thing that really I tried to, I've been working on this project of this law, tax credit law, for up 17 years.
Wow.
And have testified in front of the Ways and Means Committee 3 or 4 times during that time. We've had probably 3 or 4 different runs at trying to make it work. I will say parenthetically here that the difference this time as opposed to the other times are twofold. One is the point I wanted to make, which is that after the Georgia example opened people's eyes as to the economic impact on the state, the Georgia now has close to not $8 or $9 billion money spent there every year. And right now they have 130 some projects being shot there, and all the Marvel stuff is shot. And the way in which that has exploded there has given other states the idea to do the same thing. So surrounding us, like Illinois and Ohio and Kentucky, they all have 30% tax credits. And obviously, if it was not working, they wouldn't keep on renewing them. And so I think that the fact that there are now 38 states that have tax credits, and we are finally lagging in that regard. And the fact that we have our surrounding states have these good tax credits. And I think there were 10 movies shot in Ohio last year, feature films. And I think that we also were able to convince enough legislators that the economic impact would be really positive for our state. And that has to do with not just the money spent at the time. It's restaurants, it's hotels, it's equipment, it's real estate, studios being built. The number of, I think there may be more studios in Atlanta than there are in Los Angeles right now. Wow. That's how big it is there. The second part was we finally got a champion in the legislator that was, I call him my Rudy. He would not take no for an answer. And that's Representative Bob Morris. He was the guy who just anytime there was resistance, he just kept pounding and pounding until they relented. So, we needed that champion. We'd never had that before. And he was critical and key in getting this thing passed.
Yeah. And I know, and you mentioned this on the television show recently, you really think Indiana has some natural assets and can be kind of a cool place, cool setting for film and media production.
I do. In fact, one of the advantages that Indiana does have now with the tax credit is they have a lot of locations that never been seen before, what I call virgin territory. And the diversity it runs from the steel mills of in Northeast Indiana, where we shot part of Rudy, the beautiful sand dunes of northern Indiana and Dunes National Park. And of course, southern Indiana, the uplands, Brown County and the areas around the river towns of Jeffersonville and Evansville. And there's such a broad diversity of topography and microclimates that are possibilities for shooting.
Much more ahead with Angelo Pizzo, including his early years, moved to Bloomington, and his love for Indiana University, and in particular, IU athletics. That's when the Business and Beyond podcast continues. Welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. My guest this week is a noted screenwriter and producer, Angelo Pizzo. And Angelo, I would consider you a Hoosier. You actually weren't born here, though. You spent very few early years in suburban Chicago. Yeah,
that's pretty good research there, Gary. I spent about 2 years. I was born in Chicago. My dad went to the University of Chicago Medical School, and I was born there. And he was doing an internship at Northwestern. So we lived in Wilmette for 2 years. Then his first job out of medical school was in Bloomington. And where we moved in 1951. And it was on the corner of 7th and Jordan, which is now part of the campus. But at that time, that house was literally 1 block from Memorial Stadium football stadium and 2 blocks from the old field house. So my love of Indiana sports started very, very early. I would walk over there and watch practice when I was 4 and 5 years old. And in those days, you could do things like that, and parents would not, go nuts, freak out. So I became kind of a little mascot for the IU basketball team in my early years.
Yeah. So literally, IU was the campus was your playground in a sense, right?
It really was. And I mean, I knew every inch of that campus, and we rode our bikes and we just had a great, it was such a beautiful campus, but it's all we knew at the time. And it was just a lot of fun.
What do you remember? You mentioned going over to practice. I'm sure you've got some fond memories, even though it was a long time ago. Of those interactions with players and that kind of thing, as you say, a different time when you could really get up close and personal, I assume.
Yeah, I'll tell you a couple of stories, and one in particular has to do with Hoosiers, which was that I used to go. The only time I would kind of participate in the practice was I would rebound when they were doing their free throw shooting. I would rebound for some of the players, and I recall a couple of moments. One was how nice one of the captains of the team was at that time. And his name was Gary Long. And Gary was a Big Ten Player of the Year. And by strange coincidence, we happened to hire his son, Brad, to play one of the characters, Buddy, in the movie Hoosiers.
Oh my gosh!
So yeah, and Gary came to the set so many times, and we reminisced about those back years. Of course, he didn't remember me, but I just appreciated how nice a guy he was back in the 50s. And he's certainly the same guy. And we actually put him in as one of the coaches in the movie.
Really?
And and another thing is on one of my heroes at that time was Jimmy Rail. And we hired Jimmy's son to play on one of the opposing teams. And Jimmy would come to watch us shoot, his dad, that is, and we would have a shooting contest. And of course, even in his 40s, he beat everybody. So he never lost a touch. The second memory I have was Walt Bellamy. Walt Bellamy was 6'8", an All-American, also an extremely nice guy. I remember he was like the hero, and he didn't say very much, very quiet guy. And I would love to rebound for him more than anybody else, just because he actually asked for me a couple of times. And I ran into him at the Union Building. And, for a guy who was like 7 or 8 years old at the time, looking up at a guy who's 6'9" was it seemed like he lived in the clouds. And I remember I ran into him at the Union Building and making some comment about what it looked like, from his vantage point, the world. He said, "I'll show you." And he picked me up and he put me on his shoulders. And it seemed like I was 20 feet off the ground. So those are my Indiana University memories.
Oh, those are good. Those are good. And obviously, you're a very passionate fan. I think you're a season ticket holder, right? You go to.
Ever since I got back in Bloomington, I've not missed a game unless something drastic would have to happen for me to miss a game.
What are your thoughts? A lot of excitement around the program with Coach Woodson in there now. It had been some challenging years, a few years back. How do you feel about the program right now?
Well, I don't think there's any question that the in terms of pure talent, this is the deepest team that we've had since the Knight era. An argument could be made for the years where Cody and Victor and Jordy Hulls and that group. But I think that team was in the second five was not as deep as this team. And we may not have 2 first-round draft choices on the team, but we can withstand injury. And I think that what we don't know is the chemistry, because we've got a lot of new players, a lot of younger players, and how they gel I think Coach Woodson was the right guy at the right time, and he and his staff have done a tremendous job at bringing players in and reviving our program. And the excitement is greater now than I think, other than the 2013 team when we were rated number 1 in the country. Everybody I talked to just can't wait for basketball season.
Yeah, you mentioned Coach Knight, and certainly his tenure was such an amazing time for IU basketball that touched a lot of folks who are IU fans and otherwise. What are your remembrances of the Knight era in terms of obviously the success, but just the vibe and the excitement around campus and around IU basketball? Well,
the thing that was, as far as the Knight era, for me, is that I didn't really get to interact with and participate in those times that much, because I was living in Los Angeles.
In California, yeah.
I was. I came back and I flew back for the 1976 championship, but I flew back to Bloomington. I didn't go to the game. But in 1981, I did go to Philadelphia. And not only did I go to Philadelphia and watch them win that, but I hitched a ride with the team plane back to Bloomington.
Did you really?
Yes, I did. Well, it was the second plane. It wasn't with the players, but they had a second plane, and that was because the team doctor, Brad Bomba, and my dad were really close friends, and I was trying to figure out a way to get back to Bloomington. I went to a party afterwards and saw him. He said, "Just come with us." So it was a lot of fun. Nothing like what a campus is like after a national championship win. It was just, I think people partied for a week after that.
Oh yeah.
And in 1987, that was the night where the Academy Awards were held, and we were nominated in Hoosiers for 2 Academy Awards. So this is a story I've told many times before, but this indicates how much passion I have for Indiana. We had tickets. We were prepared to go. It was Jerry Goldsmith, the composer, and Dennis Hopper for Best Supporting Actor. And I didn't really expect Indiana to win the afternoon game on Saturday against UNLV. UNLV was favored. But they did, and they were playing Syracuse at the exact same time as the Academy Awards were being held, and it drove me crazy. And I woke up. I remember waking up on Monday morning, and I called David Anspaugh, the director of the film. I said, I can't go. I have to watch this game. And so he agreed, and he stayed, and we gave our tickets away, and we stayed home, and we watched Indiana win. On Keith Smart's last second shot. Yeah. And I don't regret not going to the Academy Awards at all. So
that is a great story. And you and Coach Knight, good relationship. You talked over the years.
Very good. Very good. In fact, it was because of that night in the paper the next day, their Herald Times, Bloomington Herald Times had, the banner headline, Indiana wins national championship. But on the lower part of the page, there was a headline, Hoosiers creators stay home to watch the game rather than go to the ceremony. And he made a comment to Joby Wright, who's assistant coach, who was a friend of both David's and mine in college. He said, now those are some serious Hoosier fans. Next time they're in town, have them come by practice. And he had not seen the film at that time. And he subsequently saw it afterwards that we found out, but Joby never told us what he thought about it. So in October, when I came back for an event, I stopped by practice, and I was in the stands. And he kept on glowering, kept on giving me really nasty stares, looking up in the stands. And I thought, what did I do? He must have hated the movie. And so at the end of the practice, I just felt that the vibes were all wrong, and that he didn't like the movie, because secretly I had not told people about this, but I sort of based the character of Coach Dale on him, his personality, and everything I knew about it, but that was from afar. And so as I was leaving, one of the graduate assistants came up and grabbed me and said, Coach needs to see you. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble. And I walked down, and he was talking to some guy. His arms were folded, and kept on looking over at me like he wanted to punch me out. And I was, he finally left, and he finally turned around, and he held his hand out. And I thought he was holding his hand out to shake it. And so I reached out to shake his hand, and he nodded his head. He wasn't going to shake my hand, but his hands was flat. I said, what? I don't understand. He said, you owe me some money. I said, what? He said, all of that dialogue is my dialogue. And and then he had a big smile, and he put his arm around me. He said, I love the movie. It was fantastic. Thank you. So then he said, what are you doing now? And I said, I'm going home to have dinner with my parents. And he said, no, you're not. You're coming with me. We're flying up to Chicago to see a recruit. So for the next 10 hours, it was me and Coach Knight talking. It was one of the most fascinating 10 hours of my entire life. And I will tell you, during that time, we never talked about basketball once. And The thing that was fascinating about Coach Knight is he had an attribute which I value very highly, and that's curiosity. A lot of people thought of him as just a pontificator and a guy who just knows everything about everything and wants to tell you how much he knows. Wasn't the case. He asked me hundreds of questions. So how did you do this? How did you do that? How did you get into this? How did you figure this out? So about the movie making process. Yeah. And in the course, we also found out we had a shared love of history. And I'm a huge history buff, and as is he, and he's a military history buff. So I think we spent the flight back talking about the Russian Revolution. Anytime I'd bring up basketball, he would just flick it away. No interest in talking basketball. Yeah. He loved talking baseball. That was actually his favorite sport, is what he told me.
Yeah.
So it was that was the beginning of an interesting friendship. that had some ups and downs, like a lot of relationships with Coach Knight. Yeah. But no, he's a fascinating man. Fascinating man.
Yeah. Did the way that ended, and of course there was the return to Assembly Hall, which was a special moment for a lot of people. But did the way it ended at the time, was that hurtful for you as an IU fan, or what were your emotions?
Well, I had mixed emotions because I had great fealty and care for Coach Knight. But at the same time, things were getting a little chippy at the university, and not that I condoned the way in which it happened, but I think there was a collision course, and there's certain inevitability, and that's sad to say that Coach Knight at the latter stages, forget about the incidents that triggered the firing. But there was grumbling about the fact that he had kind of lost his touch, and it really came down to recruiting. He just stopped, in the summer, rather than go to these, hot and sweaty gyms and watch recruits. He wants to go fishing and take time off, and he had his assistants do the heavy lifting, and it just didn't, when you have guys like Coach K and Calipari and Bill Self out there, in the gyms, and he just wasn't as effective, a recruiter. And the game had changed in that way. Recruiting had changed. So I think it was the fact, if he had previously won national championship, he could have punched everybody on the campus, and he still would have had those jobs.
That's true. Hey, one more question on sports, since you're a sports fan. It just came to mind. You're passionate about college sports in particular. I am as well. What's your take on the current state of college sports with respect to name, image, likeness, and the portal, and players literally, being able to get paid now legally? Some suggest this is the beginning of the end for college sports. That may be a little extreme, but what's your take on all that?
Well, I'm not crazy about it. I understand that players should be rewarded. I think that there inevitably it had to happen, and I'm glad for the players that it happened. But it's not right now the Wild West. It's not regulated, so it will come down to, it seems like, bidding wars for all the top players. And it's like free agency with no control, with no salary caps, for example. At least the pros have salary caps, and they have organizations that can control and regulate this kind of spending. Right now, what was below the table is now on top of the table, and the rich will keep on getting richer, and the mid-tier teams are just going to fall by the wayside. And it's a struggle. I talked to somebody on the IU football team saying, just to keep up with some of the other Big Ten schools, they're going to need $2 to $3 million next year, because they've already lost a number of players to other schools that are paying in terms of recruiting this summer. And I don't think people are aware that that's going on as much as it is. And that players who are going recruiting trips, they really want to assess how much are you going to pay me to come here. In the past that happened, it was sub rosa. Nobody really talked about it because it was illegal. But now that it is legal, it's all out there. And it's for Indiana to succeed, they're going to have to get big donors to contribute a lot of money. And in basketball, it's really going to come into play. I mean, we're talking about millions. I think Coach Cal had a quote to one of his assistant coaches that he said, Calipari of Kentucky, that is, he said, I want to be able to guarantee any recruit that I'm bringing in at least $1 million.
Wow.
So, and we're talking about, 13 scholarship players.
Yeah.
So it's the Wild West, and I don't like it, and I don't like where it's going. And as I said, teams like Ohio State already were getting the 5-star kids, but now it's guaranteed because they've got such a passionate following. They had a backup quarterback last year, Quinn Ewers, who transferred to Texas. He made $2 million without taking a snap. And the word is, this is not in public, but Arch Manning was the number 1 quarterback in the country this year, and obviously could have gone anywhere and was recruited big time by everybody. And it really turned out to be a bidding war. I heard he's making $5 million to go to Texas. And that's where Quinn Ewers is right now.
Yeah,
so
right.
Teams like Texas are going to teams like Texas are just going to outbid everybody. And they got Texas A&M put together a pool of $33 million to bring a team in. It's insane.
Yeah. Hey, Angelo, so next big thing is the Civil War project. That's what we're going to.
That's right. That's what I'm focusing on. I'm writing another script right now, and I've been saving this, been putting this in my back pocket because I actually anticipated that one day we would have a tax credit in Indiana, and this is one of my favorite stories that I've ever heard that took place in Indiana. And I'm writing that now while I wait for this other movie to set up. And it takes place in World War II at Camp Atterbury, which was the one of the biggest prisoner of war camps, Italian and German POW camps in the country. And what that did to Southern Indiana folks down there. So
another great story with Indiana connections, to be sure. Angelo Pizzo, I tell you, it's been a real treat to catch up with you, and you've got some great stories, and your accomplishments make Indiana proud. So thanks for taking the time. We look forward to seeing your next big project.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us on the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. It's a weekly conversation with achievers in business, sports, entertainment, and beyond. And you can check out all of our episodes and get Indiana business news 24/7. All you have to do is go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com. I'm Gary Dick. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.